समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to ThePrint, and welcome back to a fresh new episode of Geopolitics with Swasti, where our consulting editor for strategic and international affairs, Swasti Rao, takes your questions, dear viewers, on geopolitical developments around the world. Now, this episode is a special episode on the Israel-Iran conflict, and we are focusing solely on that. And Swasti, since a fragile ceasefire has been announced, we have had an overwhelming number of questions. So I have clubbed them into key queries and concerns, and I will lead with, of course, the burning question, which is, what is the update on the Israel-Iran conflict right now?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for sending us, those many questions.
Right.
And, the intention was to sort of just club them together so that we are able to have a more focused discussion. So Devdatta, yes, let's start from that. So the update. So indeed, this particular war, which is now referred to as the 12-day war. The 12-day war is right now, there is a ceasefire. In fact, when the ceasefire had been announced, it just broke down after a few hours. And then, there was this discussion on whether this is a ceasefire or a pause fire. Anyway, it is holding for now, and it is extremely fragile. It is backed by the United States. So ever since Iran landed up doing that staged bombing on the US bases in Qatar, the idea was very simple, that each party is looking for an off-ramp. Because it was not in their interest to carry on with this conflict. See, please understand, it's not about just carrying on with this war at any cost. With the top IRGC leadership completely decimated, Hezbollah gone, the proxies weakened, the military capabilities, affected. And also not just about Iran, also look at Israel. I mean, it's not normal for Israel to have their apartment buildings in Tel Aviv being bombed.
Absolutely.
So what I'm saying is that, yes, it is true that Iran's losses, if you also look at the number of casualties per se, Iran has had about 600, 700 people dead. And on the side of Israel, it's been about 20 or 30. So there have been deaths. Of course, for Iran, it was becoming more and more difficult. But what I'm saying is that as the B-2 bombers dropped those GBU-57 bombs on Fordo, particularly, 14 bombs were dropped on Fordo, ever since, I think the idea was very clear that each side will have to look for an off-ramp to try and de-escalate. For the US and Israel, actually that off-ramp came with the bombing. Those were unprecedented bombings because for many, many years, America has been saying that they will prevent Iran from developing the bomb. They will not let Iran have a bomb. But now that IAEA said that Iran was very close, it was actually Donald Trump that took this decision to really do the unprecedented, which is that the GBU-57, which is the grandmother of all bombs, because of course the other cousins, of course, they pale when it comes to any comparison. So for Iran and for Israel and the US, I think this was the off ramp. For Iran, they had to retaliate. In fact, I'd written a great deal on what would be Iran's options, and I had actually written a piece on arguing that from the most likely to the most dangerous, these are the options that Iran has. So out of those options, what we saw Iran doing was to, have the staged missile attack on, Qatar, US bases in Qatar. There was no casualty, no damage, nothing. And basically the search was there for an off-ramp because you see what has happened after that. Right. Donald Trump has announced ceasefire and told everybody that he's the one who's been able to successfully end the war, etc. Israel has declared victory because they said that we have decimated the top leadership, the nuclear scientists, we have, we have obliterated the nuclear enrichment facilities, etc. Iran, on the contrary, has also announced, victory. So basically, and in this entire fog of, victory and ceasefire and mediation, I think the key question still remains, which is that what really is the impact of damage on Fordo? And if you know that there was a intelligence report which was just recently leaked that said that no, it's not obliterated, particularly the facilities at Fordo, where the GBU 57 were basically brought in, but it has been delayed by perhaps several months. Now, this is where things stand right now. I think coming to Iran, it is very clear that Iran's position in the region has really significantly weakened, whichever way you want to look at it, because it's, that first line of defense that Iran has, which is its access of proxies, it's completely gone. I mean, nobody came and supported Iran. Even the closest partners such as Russia and China, never did anything to actually support Iran. You pick it up from any perspective. The only thing is that the regime has once again, proven that they are strong. And unlike what people were saying that this is going to end in regime change, perhaps it doesn't look like that, as of now. But we will see where it goes, because it is a fragile ceasefire. Israel is very clear, the US is very clear that they will not let Iran develop a bomb. In my opinion, this entire experience only shows that Iran will perhaps also sprint to the bomb, but we will see how it unfolds. Right now, it is a fragile ceasefire, yes.
Now, Swasti, moving on from that, since we are discussing about the missiles and Trump's reaction to it, a lot of our viewers have asked a question on the Pakistan paradox.
Okay.
Now, Asim Munir met Trump, and Pakistan has always been a strategic ally of Iran. So, subscriber Sankalp and another person called Lethal Knights both have a question on the Pakistan paradox, which is, what is Pakistan's interest actually in Iran? And will there be any diplomatic issues now between Pakistan and Iran or even other OIC countries since the news of the use of Pakistan air bases by USA for attacking Iran?
No, you're right. There was this theory about US cozying up to Pakistan in order to sort of prepare for an eventuality where the US has to attack Iran, and from the other side. And of course, the other side is where, Pakistan is. And perhaps that was one of the, speculations.
Also nominating him for the Nobel.
And of course, Asim Munir was doing his own bit. See, Pakistanis particularly are really enjoying this moment and this attention that they're getting post Operation Sindoor, especially the attention that they're getting from the United States. Now, in India, there are many speculations as to why this is happening. Okay, but the question is not on that. The question is on Pakistan and Iran. So let me first come to this, because this entire thing can also take a very, very long time to elaborate. So let me just first come to Pakistan and Iran. I think this is a very, very good question, and Sankalp, thank you for asking that question, because I think the relationship between Pakistan and Iran is not understood well. From Pakistan's perspective, this has been a delicate balancing act. They have good relations with Iran. They have good relations with the other Gulf states, because Pakistan is a Sunni majority state, and of course the Gulf state are Sunni majority as well. Then Pakistan right now has been cozying up again with the US. And then Pakistan has deeply entrenched relationship, and interest with China. China is an all-weather ally. Right. So how do you understand it? So I think one way to understand the Pakistan angle in this particular conflict is to sort of break it down. Let's see what is the geography, the angle of geography, the angle of energy, and the angle of security. And then this will give you an idea. So let's just start from geography. Pakistan and Iran share a 900-kilometer long border. And that border is actually on the side of Pakistan is the Balochistan province. And on the side of Iran, it is the Sistan Balochistan. The Sistan Balochistan province. Okay. And basically the thing is that the Baloch people of the two regions want to have their own Balochistan. So there is a separatist movement going on within Iran. Remember that the Iranian Baloch people are also Sunni, while the Iranian regime is Shia. So they are a minority. So long and short is that the Baloch people in Pakistan and the Baloch people in Iran, they want to create their own, country. And because of that, there are tensions. And that there are certain, terrorist groups, etc., that keep operating from Iran in order to trigger more and more instability in Pakistan, so that the Baloch people can come together. Jaish-e-Adl, right. Now, what has happened is that Pakistan, I think last year when Pakistan also carried out some missile strikes, etc., Iran retaliated, but ultimately there was de-escalation. So what I'm saying is that from and also in the current Israel-Iran conflict, these Baloch separatists, which are like the Iranian side, okay, they were supporting this resistance. They wanted the regime to
Yes,
fall, okay.
yes.
So if you look at it from Pakistan's perspective, a destabilized Iran is again not in the interest of Pakistan, because then it fears that the Balochi voice will get further
Increased.
increased, further enhanced, further strengthened. So
Absolutely.
so the first thing that you have to understand is that, so from Pakistan's side, it is easier said than done that Pakistan will allow the US to use its bases. Actually, frankly, US doesn't need to use its bases only. That happens to be one option. But then Pakistan has genuine interests in keeping the Iranian regime stable, and in fact a tight control of the regime over all these separatist movements, because they are completely again against Pakistan's interest also. So that's the geography factor, which is that you have to keep that into account. The second, and the interesting part, is energy. Iran is very, very important for Pakistan. There was a time when Iran and Pakistan wanted to have a pipeline.
Yes.
Okay, and that was called the IP pipeline, the Iran-Pakistan pipeline. Now, of course, it started many, many years ago. I think it was perhaps signed sometime in 90s. It was also called the peace pipeline back then. And then, but I mean, I can tell you a lot of details, but basically the IP, the pipeline could never really see the light of the day because of so many other problems, because, the Pakistani side didn't live up to its, promises, and then there were sanctions, and then Donald Trump came, etc., etc. America still remains to be very against this pipeline. And the trivia that you should know, that should interest you, is that there was a time when India was invited to be a part of this pipeline, and at that time it was made into the IPI. And India was invited formally in 1999, and then perhaps India withdrew in 2009 after the 2008 terror attacks. Okay, so for about a decade, India was very much on board. So this is just a little bit of a blast from the past. That so basically the IP pipeline is still, I mean, pretty much in doldrums, even though on paper there have been some progress made here and there. Also remember that Pakistan actually imports a lot of the non oil products from Iran. And if you look at the total trade, so in last year's financial year, so Iran exported about $2.4 billion worth of non-oil goods to Pakistan, and that actually also entrenches Iran's importance for Pakistan, right? So but then, as you know, that Pakistan is also wary of the US sanctions, etc., etc. So long and short is that Iran remains an important pillar when it comes to Pakistan's energy requirements, even though we all know that the topmost oil buyer of Iranian oil is now China, especially since it's been sanctioned. So that also entrenches Pakistan, very firmly into that very pro-Iranian sort of space. And the third and the more interesting bit is about security. Now, I don't know how many people here know or how many of our viewers know that when in the 1965 war and in the 1971 war, Iran supported Pakistan. Iran didn't support India. So when we say here in India that India and Iran have had traditional friendships, I mean, you have to also take in account that things were not like this in the Cold War. In 65, they sent them arms and ammunition. In 71, they said that we'll send you fighters. They didn't send. It's a different thing. But they said that we'll send. Why? Because Iran and Pakistan and Iraq, etc., Turkey, they have been part of the CENTO. CENTO is the Central Treaty Organization, which was which are like non-NATO members but very pro-Western bloc, and they were pushed. They were pushing the Western narrative. And if you then remember, back in the day, we had closer relationship with Soviet Union.
Right.
So the argument that all these countries have been like all these, as in Iran has been a very old friend of India's. I mean, that's not true, particularly looking from the security perspective. Okay, so there were geopolitical realities which were different in 1965 and 71, etc. Similarly, when the first Iran-Iraq war happened, I mean, Pakistan avidly supported Tehran in it. Okay, also on Kashmir, actually. Even on Kashmir, although Iran has been measured in its criticism of India on the matter of Kashmir, but frankly around 2017, 2019, and during the abrogation of the Article 370 particularly, we must know that Iran the initial responses were measured and they said that, okay, the both sides should de-escalate, etc. But in a tweet, and I remember it came in August, of that year, and in a tweet, Khamenei, he came out very blatantly criticizing India on the abrogation of Article 370. So similarly, when it comes to Israel, now Pakistan has always supported Iran against Israel. Pakistan has been, ever since the Hamas attack happened in 2023, and everything that followed from Israel's side, Pakistan has been a vehement critic of all of that, and very, very consistently. And this is a position which is actually really liked in Iran. I mean, Iran has publicly thanked Pakistan again and again and again and again that you are doing the right thing. And what has also happened is that if you look at this particular geopolitical reality, you do see that there are, do you know that Iran for many, many years has been pushing, for joining the BRI projects. So if you see carefully, you do see a kind of a nexus emerging between Iran, China, Pakistan, and Russia, even though Russia is not really a very important player in the region right now. But they have shared interests when it comes to promoting a non-Western sort of an order. And this also comes in stark contrast of the recent developments of Pakistan cozying up to the US, which shows that Pakistan cozying up to the US is more an anti-India sentiment somewhere, not really a completely changed or an altered US calculus in Pakistan, because it only wanted to attack Iran. Okay, because if you look at the economic interest, if you look at the strategic interest, if you look at the energy interest, all of that, it's more entwined with this particular, club that I just told you about, which is, Iran and China and Pakistan together, along with Russia, but not really in the region right now. Sorry. And this also comes in direct confrontation with, for example, India's overtures in the region. I'm sure there is a question on India, so I'll come to that later. But here it will suffice to say that, while India is trying for, the India-Iran-Afghanistan trilateral to try and reduce Afghanistan's dependence on the Karachi port. Similarly, India has a India-Iran and Armenia trilateral to try and connect Armenia to INSTC first, right? Then India is anyway, pushing for connecting the Chabahar to INSTC, because it's INSTC, you have to create a rail link there. But all of this comes in stark contrast because it's the same Iran that has been publicly again and again pushing for joining the BRI projects, trying to connect, for example, China. China has $400 billion worth of investment plans, in Iran. So this money is way, way, way too big, okay, than what we offer. So we do offer, of course, we will multi-align, and we are going to balance and China's presence in the region. But all I'm trying to tell you is that it doesn't really work out like that when you look at the strategic space in that particular region. I did not mention one factor here, which is Turkey. Now, because Turkey has been so unequivocally in support of Pakistan against India during Operation Sindoor, that also makes a kind of a strengthened case for Pakistan to actually have its loyalties this side than the other way around, because perhaps Pakistan also realizes that whatever is happening right now ultimately is just a Donald Trump quirk, Donald Trump's strategic quirk. End of the day, America's economic, geopolitical, all interests are lying in the Indo-Pacific, where they have to look for a long-term strategy against China. So if you look at it like this, then you do see that there is a deepening of consensus and a deepening of worldview, deepening of economic view among these countries that I just told you about. And even though Pakistan keeps playing a balancing game, and it will continue to play a balancing game, because Pakistan is a champion, at being this strategic chameleon, it can completely change its colors whenever it wants. But still, that is how you have to understand Pakistan's support for Iran, and the other things being more of lip service. Okay?
Swasti, following up on that it's the next question where Ravi Rules asks what this war means for Russia and China. We did discuss a little bit on this, but like you said, both countries have investments in Iran, and his question asks, what are the capability aspects for both China and Russia in Iran?
Russia first, because we were just discussing China. So when you start with Russia, it's a reasonable vantage point to understand what was Russia's Middle East strategy. So Russia's Middle East strategy actually sort of hinged on a few very, very clear factors. One was propping up Assad's regime in Syria, because it was a very non-Western regime, so of course that was logical. The second was also the fact that, and this particular support and this propping up was not just diplomatic or semantic. Russia had bases. Russia had an air base in Khmeimim, and Russia had a naval base in Tartus. Okay. And then Russia was also supplying weapons and everything. The second was Russia's support to Iran and Iran's proxies, especially Hezbollah. In fact, I had myself written on it, and there is a lot of work on how there is an extensive chain of crypto networks through which Russia was actually sending money to Hezbollahs. So, and this is something that Israel has been after. So Israel, and that's another balancing game, because when it came to the Russia-Ukraine war, Israel was very neutral. But then after the Hamas attack, Israel's position started switching towards a more anti-Russia stand because of the fact that Russia was supporting Hezbollah. A lot of discussion was happening on what are the ways in which Russia is supporting Hezbollah and what are the crypto networks, etc. So that was the second element of Russia's, support. And then it was also supported by China.
Right.
So though China has particularly very, very economic interest in the region, China doesn't have many military interests in the region. China has, like for example in Iran, China is looking at $400 billion worth of investment, etc. And because China is the biggest buyer of Iranian oil. But when it comes to Russia, it was basically that. Okay, and there's something that a lot of people do not follow here in India, is that from Russia's base in Syria, which was Tartus, what they were doing was that they had also created a logistic supply line between that side and their part of the region. Okay, and they called it the Syrian Express. And I found out about the Syrian Express and had a discussion on the Syrian Express during one of my trips to Ukraine, where I was speaking to the Ukrainian Navy, and then they started telling about how is Russia, through its bases in Syria, is able to support this particular battlefront against Ukraine from the Black Sea. Okay, so there are so many sort of ramifications of Russia having bases in Syria. Now, what happened that when Assad regime fell, we saw that Russia couldn't do anything because Russia was way too preoccupied with its war in Ukraine, and Russia doesn't have the strategic bandwidth, and this is something that I keep repeating. Now, on the paper, Iran has comprehensive strategic partnerships with both Russia and China. With Russia, they had one in, I think, early 2025. And with China, they had one in 2021. But if you look at the essence of these comprehensive strategic partnerships, they are less to do with defense and more got to do with economy. Okay, they're more economic in nature. Now, especially the one with Russia does talk about defense cooperation, but nothing happened. And this is extremely, in many ways it is bad for Iran, because Iran's Shahed 136 drones have been a game changer for Russia in the initial days of the war when they used them extensively against Ukraine. But when it came to Iran, helping Iran, Russia did not have the bandwidth to help them with, because their bases are no longer there. The current leader of Syria after Assad, okay, is a very pro-Western one. He's been quoted by the West all the time. In fact, there's so much criticism on how somebody who was earlier an Al-Qaeda, affiliate Al-Qaeda leader has suddenly now become a West darling. So what I'm saying is that where is the strategic bandwidth for Russia? It's just not there. So Russia's policy in the Middle East is completely, failed because of it went down with Assad. With whoever came, they became a darling of the West. And the Russians could not. The Hezbollah and all the access of the proxies was again decapacitated by Israel. So this is what Russia was riding its foreign policy in the Middle East, and it's no longer there. Part of the reason, in fact, one big part of the reason why Russia has not been able to do anything is only because of this ever prolonged war in Ukraine, which was meant to be a 3 to 5 day affair, and now even though we are seeing that Donald Trump is no longer giving the kind of support that Biden administration did, and Europe is on its own, but Ukraine is fighting, and Ukraine is in fact also able to pull off these strategic surprises because, and I'm referring to this Operation Spiderweb, which they were able to, perpetrate on
Absolutely.
Russia and caught the whole world by surprise. Okay, so that's about Russia. That Russia doesn't have the bandwidth, even though it has genuine interest. And in fact, even when, if you remember, the day that Iran decided to bomb, though the staged bombing, I called it the Middle Eastern Institute of Performing Arts, okay, because it was just so staged. Okay, so the day that Iran decided to bomb the US bases in Qatar, telling them beforehand that, "Bhai, we are bombing, could you please just make sure nothing comes in between?" Okay, so the same day, the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi actually went to Moscow to meet Putin. And if you remember, what Putin said was that there was no military support. They just said that, yes, it's diplomatic support, it's semantic support, it was basically lip service, and Putin was not able to do anything. And I think, in my opinion, the fact that Iran also understood that they have to look for an off ramp and they cannot delay looking for an off ramp also came from all these letdowns, because of course this is
They
never
had
going
no
to come out
support.
this is never going to come out in public. But just imagine that Iran gave so many Shahid drones, thousands of Shahid drones to Russia, and Russia is not in a position to help them because of this
Ongoing
consuming
war.
war. So that's about Russia. And coming to China, like I mentioned, the China is is of course the biggest buyer of Iranian oil. China is also, Iran is very much interested in joining the BRI, etc. So jumping on that bandwagon. Now, of course, there's also Turkey that is supporting this particular axis, even though Turkey remains to be a NATO member. But then everybody knows that Turkey's love and support for everything which is non-Western and anti-Western, of course, it's there. But very quickly, I'll tell you how Donald Trump's involvement in the Middle Eastern theater, or the West Asian theater, whichever way you want to call it, is helping China and Russia. So there is a short-term benefit which is accrued here, and the short-term benefit is that the more American assets and American strategic attention is focused on the Middle Eastern region, the fewer resources it would have to allocate to Indo-Pacific.
Indo-Pacific.
And similarly, if you know that there was news that a lot of patriots which were basically meant to go to Ukraine found their way to Israel. And in that sense, it was a respite for Russians, because Russia, obviously that kind of a vacuum was always good for Russia in order to advance its own military interests and military, campaigns against Ukraine. So in the short term, you can argue that Donald Trump's preoccupation with the Middle East is welcomed by both China and Russia, because it gives them respite in their own theaters. Okay, but now, after the 12-day war has come to a ceasefire, so now we are again back to the same logic, that eventually we will see that Donald Trump will get freer here, and normalization of the Middle East will frankly leave America the space and the bandwidth to then again shift focus on the Indo-Pacific. Right now, actually, it doesn't look like that, because if you carefully see, and this is of course one of the cost of the American involvement in the Middle Eastern theater has been the Indo-Pacific. There is no doubt about it. At that summit, South Korea, Japan, these countries refused to meet Donald Trump. Why? Because they were very critical of Donald Trump's support to Israel and Donald Trump's bombing and all of that. So in the I still do not see that this is going to have implications for Quad. But Quad is going to happen in India later in the year, and we will see whether or not Quad is able to develop the teeth that it was supposed to develop under Donald Trump, because there seems to be a kind of a, it does seem that Donald Trump's strategic concentration is a bit haywire. Right? One doesn't know. Does he want to really be serious with his tariff strategy? Does he want to be serious with his non-interventionist strategy? Does he want to be serious with supporting Israel? Does he want to be serious with, focusing on Indo-Pacific? Frankly, one doesn't know. So this is rather unprecedented, the fact that Donald Trump really took this decision. But I was just the other day, listening to this wonderful discussion by Ian Bremmer, where he actually proved that a lot of people don't see that Donald Trump has been one of the most pro-Israel presidents. He compared his first presidency to the second presidency, and he said that if you look at it from that perspective, you will see that even though Donald Trump would not have done it for anybody else, he would still have done it for Israel. So from here, you cannot draw this particular inference that Donald Trump, that America is back. And in fact, I asked this question also to one of our, American defense experts when I was doing a print uninterrupted with them. I said, "Bhai, what happened? This time taco didn't taco, right? And does it mean that America is back?" And he also actually alluded to the same thing, saying that no, Israel is a special case. So, the Europeans have no reason to celebrate that America is back in Middle East, so America is going to be back in Europe too. And I think they understand it, and that's why they're spending 5% of the GDPs. But long and short is that yes, Russia is it's not having any skin in the game, especially in the Middle Eastern theater. China has a long game to play. And Russia, if you want to buy this argument that Russia has become a junior partner to China, it is going to support that axis. Okay, that you do see emerging between Iran, China, Turkey, Pakistan. Russia will support it.
And finally, Swasti, coming back to India, we have at least 6 to 7 questions from different people like Durgesh Dubey, Pratyush, Sridhar PB, Ashutosh Tripathi, and others, and all of them want to know what about India in this conflict? What are India's interests, and how can India navigate this whole conflict for its own benefit or for its own trade or other purposes?
See, India has genuine interest in Iran. There is no doubt about it. The more important question to ask is, does India has interest in the Iranian regime or the Iranian geography? I'm of the opinion that India has genuine interest in the Iranian geography. Regime or no regime is not our headache, okay? And also because, as you may have seen, that India did not say anything. Okay, so India is also sort of, our policy of just not taking any side anywhere is also continuing. And frankly, I'm not sure if it is a good thing or a bad thing, frankly, because see, when ceteris paribus, if rest things being equal, if the world is a quiet place, if the world is, a global village, and then you want to be friends with everybody, it's a great strategy. But when the world is getting more and more militarized, and when you are seeing that there is no dull moment in geopolitics, militarily speaking, and still we just don't want to have an opinion on anything, it might come back to hurt us. And in fact, one of the arguments which was made during Operation Sindoor and how India was on its own, frankly, was because there was nobody that really came and supported India's stand of linking the Pahalgam attacks to Pakistan, while everybody condemned the attacks. So, and then the counter that was given to that was that everybody's friend is nobody's friend. Okay, maybe something like that. So, we are still very early on in all these things to actually have a very final word on it. But like I said, that the key takeaway is that India has genuine interest in Iran's geography. And very quickly, I'll tell you what those interests are. The first interest definitely is connectivity, because India is certainly, pushing for the INSTC, and India has also invested in Chabahar port, one of the terminals of the Chabahar port. So we are wanting to link that with rail link to the INSTC, and then ultimately we want to sort of again push for Armenia's to join the INSTC, etc. So it's an alternative connectivity where Iran really holds a lot of importance for us, also our investments. The second thing is that, see, it is through Iran, Devdatta, that India maintains a strategic depth in Afghanistan, because we have to bypass Pakistan, right? Similarly, it is through Iran that we maintain our outreach to Central Asians. Okay, please remember that SCO is not enough. Just now, Rajnath ji went to attend the SCO summit in China. We have not signed the SCO joint statement. We refuse to sign. Why? Because, it is again the same thing. It is not mentioning Pahalgam. Okay, it is mentioning Baluchistan, but it is not mentioning, Pahalgam. And it is like India and Pakistan are on the same footing. Okay, so what I'm saying is that India's engagement with SCO is not enough to guarantee our outreach to Central Asians. We need to have an alternative route for that, and it is via Iran that we get it. So India's Afghanistan policy is very much determined by how our ties are with Iran. India's Central Asia outreach is also very much determined, because we also see that Russia's influence is waning in that region. Yeah, it has never happened that China and the Central Asians, the C5, they have started to have their independent engagement. Until now, it was always in the presence of Russia. But like I said, that Russia has gotten so, involved with the war in Ukraine, and one doesn't know how long the war will go because it's
Continue.
just continuing and continuing and continuing. So long and short is that India needs Iran for these kind of things. And then also remember that when it comes to India's support for Balochistan, which is like a diplomatic support, because again it comes from the fact that we need to keep Pakistan on the tenter hooks, etc. Even for that, we have to be it has to be done via Iran,
Iran,
right?
of course.
So India has strategic interest in the geography of Iran. Whether or not we have interest in the regime change, one of my arguments has been that, listen, if there is a change in Iranian politics that makes sure that the sanctions are removed, it is in our interest, because lesser sanctions means smoother trade. Remember, we were buying so much oil from Iran, we stopped it because Donald Trump put sanctions. So if we are able to come at a relatively stable situation where the sanctions are removed, it would be great for us, no? But then I don't know whether that's happening, because the Iranian regime per se has also shown to be more resilient than everybody thought it would be. In fact, currently they are also going down in a big way. They're cracking down on dissidents. If you just notice what is happening in Iran, they're cracking down on dissidents very, very, seriously. So long and short is that India has genuine interest in Iran, but at the same time, India has equally or more interest with the other bloc, Israel today. When nobody supported us in Operation Sindoor, only Israel did. There were tweets after tweets after tweets from different tweets, as in posts, okay, from different, whether it's the Israeli ambassador to India, whether, it is, the IDF, etc., that they are standing with India, they're standing with India, And so that's one, but that's just still at a strategic diplomatic level. Israel is one of the three major players in our defense industry modernization, the other two being US and France. Okay, one can just go on and on about how important Israel has been. In fact, all of India's plans to export more weapons to regions that we were not exporting earlier at. So I'll give you a small example. So for example, Prime Minister recently went to Cyprus, and there was so much discussion on, defense industry cooperation, which was mainly closed doors, but we will see it in later, weeks and months. So for instance, think of the situation. So Cyprus uses a Barak MX anti-aircraft system, okay, which is a big system. India is co-producing the Barak 8 missiles with India's like DRDO and Israel. So you can work out a modus operandi where we then start co-producing for Cyprus, isn't it? So what I'm trying to say is that from very tiny little details to the bigger strategic picture, India has genuine interest with Israel. In fact, very, very important interest. Israel is there in Haifa. I mean, IMEC, Israel is important there. Israel is important, so, like really important for India. Similarly, India's most important strategic partner in the region, UAE, okay, with whom we have extensive plans. We have triangular cooperation. We have extensive cooperation with UAE. Saudi Arabia and our ties are, doing so well. India has very genuine interest with Qatar for our energy security. So what I'm saying is that India plays a balancing act. India would like normalization to come back as soon as possible. India has interest with Iran, but India also has genuine interest with the other side. And if you ask my opinion, I don't think that India's multi-alignment in the Middle Eastern region is an equal distribution. I'm of the opinion that while India has genuine interest in Iran, but India has more important interest with them, because all of them are actually related to India's future visions of becoming a completely developed country by 2047. So whether it's weapons, whether it's weapons industry, whether it's exports, whether it's connectivity, whether it's green corridors, you name it. Okay, so in India's interest, it is best that this conflict ends, normalization returns, and frankly, because we have these, the multi-alignment, we are not really having any statement to give. I'm not sure if it is a good or a bad strategy, frankly.
Right. And with that, Swasti, we come to the end of this episode. Like we mentioned in the beginning, dear subscribers, this was a special on the Israel-Iran conflict. We look forward to your questions on diverse topics for our next episode. See you until then. Thank you, Swasti.